a section of the course that people are a little ropey on. So we'll do a little revision of the approach here. This is the second one of these videos that I'm recording. So we're going to look at this one from 2013. It was a poem called The Fist by Derek Walcott, the great Derek Walcott. This is a very interesting poem. But what we want to do first is look at the question that I decided to answer. So it was question 2. Don't forget there will always be 2 questions on unseen poetry. One of the questions will be broken up into 2 parts, A and B, and the second one is just standalone. Unseen poetry is marked out at 20 marks, so the standalone question's worth 20 marks, and the 2 A and B sections are usually worth 10 marks each. And my advice is to follow that old rule from your junior cycle or junior cert days, that for every 5 marks available, write a paragraph. So this is asking us to comment on the poet's use of language in the poem, and that's it. It's a discursive task. What do you think of the poet's use of language? So if you're asked something like that, there's a load of things that you should consider. Okay, what are they? What should you consider? Well, you should definitely consider the poet's use of imagery, and within imagery, and there's a number of things to consider. Does the poet use metaphor or figurative language? Be good if I could spell. Does the poet use similes? Does the poet appeal to the senses? Does the poet pay attention to detail? So, thinking about things like noun adjective combinations, precise verb selection, and so on. Okay? So those are all kind of things that can result in, for want of a better term, imagery. So we'll just put that there. Just look out for things like that, and if you can spot examples, then you're going to be able to write paragraphs. Now, when you're looking at for sensual imagery, don't forget to look out for onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia is just a really simple technique that writers employ to appeal to the aural sense. And, an examiner's going to be impressed if you can spot an example of onomatopoeia and comment on the impact that has on you as a reader, bringing the images to life by appealing to more than one sense, I suppose, is what onomatopoeia does. So when you're looking at language, you are looking for imagery, but you're not just looking for imagery. And that's why there's been a couple of questions in the last couple of years in which they mentioned, a writer's use of language, including imagery, which would suggest you're looking at something else besides imagery, doesn't it? That does suggest that. So what else are you looking at besides imagery? Well, how about rhythm? So, how do poets create rhythm? Well, they use rhyme. They use metrical structures. And by the way, when you write the word meter in poetry, Martin Kelly, shout out to you. Thank you for pointing this out to me after 20 years of doing it wrong. It's not spelled in the same way as we spell like the measurement of length. The measurement of length is spelled M-E-T-R-E. Meter, as in poetry, is spelled M-E-T-E-R. Martin Kelly, my friend and former colleague, pointed it out to me in his usual kind and forgiving way. He had a lot of patience with me. Anyway, rhythm, rhyme, meter, and then you're looking at things like alliteration, assonance, and consonants, I suppose, and sibilants. So those can be all combined to give a poem like a certain rhythm, a certain musicality that you can comment on and say that it adds to that rhythm, that cadence adds to the quality of the poem, as to your enjoyment of the poem, or even, you can always use that phrase that junior cycle students taught me once, that some teacher they had said it to them. I said, I'm going to steal that. It's a great idea that the alliteration sharpens an image. And it does, when it draws your attention to, a particular line, alliteration or assonance can. And then the other thing about sibilance to mention is that sibilance is very, very important when it comes to atmosphere. Okay, so that's something to consider. So you think about imagery, you're thinking about then rhythm and cadence. You can talk about stuff like that when you're looking at your unseen poem. And sorry, I just want to check. Yeah. So what else are you looking at? Well, maybe you can talk about, dramatic language. What do I mean by that? Well, how about things like an engaging opening? How about things like hyperbole? Deliberate over-exaggeration to highlight a point or to draw attention to a point. Or repetition even, the kind of things that that we come across in persuasive language. Things like, emotive language. Or even monosyllabic. We've seen it, haven't we, this year? How many poets on the prescribed course, deliberately lapse into words of one syllable when they're trying to convey a particular point, or to be clear on something, or to discuss a topic which is maybe emotionally challenging or difficult. So these are all things you can look out for in a poem. I haven't mentioned enjambment or enjambment, whatever the hell you want to call it. There's so many things. And if you really want to go down a rabbit hole, go study the technical side of writing poetry, because bloody hell, it's designed to melt your brain. So here we go. Let's see if we can find any of those things in this poem. So this was a lovely short poem. The poem is never long on the Leaving Cert, but sometimes they can be very short, and I think students find that difficult because they think there's not enough in it. But let me show you, there's loads here. The fist clenched round my heart. Straight away, what a dramatic opening that is. What a fantastic use of imagery. It's clearly a metaphor. There's not an actual fist clenched round the heart, but straight away we get the sense of pressure and distress, and we get this very physical image. It's a metaphor, it's figurative language. The choice of verb is very precise, clenched, and all its associations with things being tight and uncomfortable, and then the reference to that feeling around your heart captures the poet's distress. It's fantastically powerful opening line. And again, if you look at it, all words of one syllable, the imagery is powerful, but the language is simple, and that's one of the gifts that Walcott has in his poetry. The fist clenched round my heart loosens a little. Again, you have a lovely example of alliteration there. Loosens a little. Very dramatic. And I gasp brightness. Gasp, onomatopoeic. The sharp intake of breath. And then the imagery. How can you gasp brightness? That appears to be an oxymoron, a contradictory phrase, something that doesn't make sense. But in fact, there's a sense of gasp is a relief of pressure, and brightness is darkness and light imagery, and it's suggestive of a moment of happiness. And then it tightens again. So the imagery is very, very, very striking, and the physical sense of a heart being clenched and then released, the release of breath before the pressure comes on again, captures something about the reality of the poet's life at this moment. The poet is not speaking directly. The poet is not speaking literally, but it's not that hard to understand the degree and the level of distress that the poet is enduring. Then we have this fantastic example of a rhetorical question. When have I ever not loved the pain of love? And it's the repetition of love there. It's so striking. You got a writer who's saying, look, I've always been like this. There's never been a time when I haven't been, involved in kind of passionate and difficult relationships. And he's asking himself that question, but he already knows the answer. And you learn so much about his character from that very, very simple line. Again, look at the language, monosyllabic, simple and straightforward, loads of things to say. But this has moved past love to mania. There's what enjambment is. I'll just write that word down here. It kind of does add to rhythm in poetry. That's that, where there's a natural flow in the sentence from the end of one stanza into the next. And we have this, he's gone mad. This is moved beyond love into mania. Very dramatic language. The use of that word mania, the choice of that noun to describe his psychological and emotional state. Very, very striking. This has there's the repetition again, clench of the madman. The image of the madman, that's the poet's description of himself, his own psychological state. And then, for me, the best part of the poem. This is gripping the ledge of unreason before plunging, howling into the abyss. And look, as somebody who has no talent in any part of my life, when I come across, real talent, I'm always, whether it be, somebody with a hurl in their hand or, somebody who's naturally funny, whatever it is, I'm always sitting back going, bloody hell, wow, well done. And that's how I feel when I read that line. Like, he's on the edge, he's cracking up. And in order to express that, he brings up this fantastic image of somebody hanging off the edge of a building, gripping the ledge. But it's not the ledge of the building. And if you can nearly, the tactile image of the fingers gripping the ledge, but, slipping slowly. But it's not a building. It's not a physical fall. It's a psychological fall. It's unreason, which again is madness. And then the sense of plunging. I talk about precise verb selection. What a verb choice. To plunge. People have dreams about, the falling dream, out of control, to plunge, to fall, and with no ability to control or to stop the sensation. And then the onomatopoeia of howling. So there's onomatopoeia in gasp, and there's onomatopoeia in howling, capturing, the reality of his psychological state. And you're not just plunging, you're not just howling, you're going into the abyss. That sense of that that the fall will never end. It's nothingness and darkness, and it captures how he feels. He's in love, but he's in pain, and he feels that he's going to be driven mad by that combination. So he tells himself, and we talked about alliteration earlier, he tells himself, hold, hard, then heart. He's talking to himself, and the language is so dramatic. Hold hard, then heart. It's almost militaristic. Here come the enemy. Hold hard, This way at least you live. And what he's saying to himself is, don't fall in love. Be hard. Resist. Because if you fall in love again, and if you go into this madness here, you might not survive it. So it's one of the great poems, The Fist by Derek Walcott. It's a poem I've always loved. There's an element of humor to it. I mean, there's definitely an element of hyperbole and exaggeration. But what a great choice of poem for them to put on the Leaving Cert as an unseen poetry task. And then you're gonna write your 4 paragraphs. So I've written a couple of paragraphs here. I'll read a couple of samples for you now very quickly before I finish up this little video. So let me do something here. So it's asking about, it's asking you to discuss your what you think of his language. So, give your opinion. I enjoyed this poem. That's okay. You're allowed to say that. That's fine. So it better be to do with the language. It is clever and interesting as it addresses universal themes like love, pain, and the power of compulsion, which make it easy to relate to. I particularly enjoyed Walcott's innovative style of writing. Right? That's on task. He employs metaphor, repetition, alliteration, hyperbole particularly effectively. See that list? That shows you know your stuff, and that has the examiner sitting up straight going, okay, well, here we have a serious candidate. I also admired Walcott's precision of language. Okay, very good. Again, you're seeing this kid here knows what they're talking about. This candidate is not a waffler, not a spoofer. Simple things like his choice of verb and his use of onomatopoeia combine to make the language in the fist powerful, vivid, and at times visceral. Visceral means kind of raw and uncomfortable. But powerful, vivid, and visceral, they all mean good. So when they ask what discusses use of language, well, I think his language is good. You know, that's an opening. Now, do you need to write an opening paragraph? No. Do you have time to this year? Yes. Why not? Makes a good impression. You can't read that and not go, oh, okay, this kid, this person is competing for the marks here. And then remember, follow your RIC rules. Each paragraph should have a clear, relevant topic sentence which identifies it. It needs to be relevant to the question. Then you put a couple of quotes in to show you're informed. You write as clearly as you can, and then you contextualize your points. Let's look at some examples. This poem is about the power of love. Okay, so that's grand. What's that got to do with language? Walcott's deliberate repetition. Okay, now you're on language. Of that word in the line, when have I not loved the pain of love, is striking and unusual. That's you discussing his use of language. You're saying it's striking and unusual. That's your opinion. It conveys the poet's style. He didn't say, I think it is. You're just saying it is. It conveys the poet's dilemma. He wants to feel love, but has experienced the pain wrought by love when it goes wrong. He also repeats the verb clench in the first line, the fist clenched around my heart, and in the second stanza, this is the strong clench of a madman. The choice of the verb and its repetition has the effect of emphasising the power of love. I think Walcott used this verb to underline just how potent the force love is. That's a great paragraph. It's about the theme of love, but it's about how he uses repetition to discuss that theme in an interesting way. So that's about his use of language. Now you're going to move to a separate point, so you use a separate paragraph. Remember that rule? Separate point, separate paragraph. This brings me to the power of the figurative language in the poem. Again, a lovely topic sentence that's relevant to the question, obeying the OR rule of the RIC rules. The OR rule is be relevant. Obviously, the fist squeezing his heart is a symbol of the power of love. It is immediate. Again, in your opinion, it's immediate. You're discussing it, and communicates the poet's point effectively. There you are discussing it. Later in the second stanza, he describes his feeling of fear as gripping the ledge of unreason before plunging into the abyss. This is again a brilliant example of symbolism. Symbolism, figurative language, all the same thing. It communicates the real fear the poet feels when he knows he is falling in love. Again, the choice of the verb plunge is apt, as it sums up the poet's terror. So very tight, very controlled, very clear commentary on the poet's use of language, but every paragraph has its own identity. So this is on his poet's use of language repetition. This is on the poet's use of language, figurative language. And now we have a third paragraph on onomatopoeia and hyperbole. Finally, I admire the poet's use of onomatopoeia and hyperbole. The use of gasp and howling really adds to the tense atmosphere of the poem. These verbs are part of a pattern of hyperbole in the poem that begins with the first line, should be, very bold, Paul, read your work, of the poem, and continues. Again, see that of the poem is not needed there. Sure it's not, because I've already said that phrase here. So reread your work and check for unnecessary repetition. And continues with lines like I gasp brightness, and the final monosyllabic line, hold hard then heart. This way at least you live. The sense that his life is under threat, that he is like a soldier in combat who is under attack, is of course an example of exaggeration. However, I think it is very effective as it communicates the poet's sense of genuine terror, that he is making a mistake because he loves the pain of love. The use of hyperbole added a sense of drama to the poem. I crossed out I really liked how, because I don't need, that's patent from what you're saying. Then a little conclusion, you got your opening, which shows loads of knowledge, and 3 analytical paragraphs, perfect length, 620 words this answer. In conclusion, I enjoyed reading Derek Walcott. It's about 600 because that includes the little notes I put in. In conclusion, I enjoyed reading Derek Walcott's poem, The Fist. It suggests that Walcott is a very talented writer, and finished by referring to the key words in the question. His choice of language results in imagery that is at all times memorable, powerful, and original. That's a 20 out of 20 mark answer. So there you go. That's a little revision of unseen poetry.